Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Teacher's Table. Today we have a talk back with Alexis Wiggins. I'm super excited to have her on, so let's all give her a warm welcome. And if you could, little Teacher's Table etiquette here. If you could drop a comment in the comment box so we know who's here, and if you could also welcome anybody else that comes to the table. The Teacher's Table is all about being kind of a welcoming community for everybody. So if you could help us do that. And yeah, without further ado, here we are. Alexis, welcome.
Hi, so nice to be here.
Yeah, I absolutely loved your session. We met, I don't remember where that was, Boston?
Yeah, it was Boston.
It was Boston?
ASB.
Yeah, and I saw your session, absolutely loved it, and I put in, I don't know, doesn't matter where I put it in, but I watched it, I went back, and I instantly put it into practice. And I just think there are very few non-tech tools. I mean, you can more easily do that with a tech tool, right? But if we're talking about like pedagogy, there's very few times where you instantly come back from something and say like, I'm gonna give it a try. I'm gonna literally give it a try on Monday. And that's what I did. And I guess I wanted to start with asking you, I mean, clearly there's a ton of intentionality that you could put behind this and make just right. But do you believe it's something that somebody could jump in to at least get a taste?
Absolutely. I always say that I want every workshop I present or book or article that I write about spiderweb discussion in, I want it to pass the Monday morning test, so that you have everything you have when you finish the workshop or the book to go in Monday morning and implement all of it. I love to just say to people, just try it. There's always a lot of questions, concerns, worries. How will this work? Well, I teach kindergarten. Would it work with them? And I teach science. Would it work? What does this look like online? And it's like, well, just try it and then let me know. And I honestly, every single time people will come back to me and say, I didn't know my kids could do that. I mean, I thought it would kind of go like this, but it was like amazing and they loved it. Or
that was so my experience. Like, and I mean, everybody, I hope you guys hear this. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, I'm not, like, the check is not in the mail. She's not like paying me to say this.
All of this is for free.
All this is for free. I put it in play, and I was worried a little bit because, I mean, Alexis really talks about how she worked with her kids. She modeled it with her kids. And I was like, I just want to try it. I can take the time to be intentional later, but I really want to put this in play. I want to see it. And so I didn't really use your coding system. I just sort of came up with some things I could remember for the day. I told my kids, like, all right, guys, we're going to try this. And I really explained to them that I'm going to be on the side and it's non-evaluative. I really tried to tell them, I'm just over here. Don't worry about me. And we did it, and the kids blew me away. I mean, I teach sixth grade. For those of you that don't know me, I really didn't think they could carry on a conversation that we wouldn't just be like regurgitating each other. Like, I agree with Alexis. That was really good, and then just rephrase what she said, and then somebody else will say, I agree with Michael, who's just really agreeing with Alexis. Like, but they didn't. Like, it was a rich conversation.
I am so excited when I get a teacher to try it for the first time and they come back. It happens almost 100% of the time. When I was a coach in high school or when I would present internationally, people would just come back or write me, oh my gosh. And there was just this excitement in their faces about how much these kids could actually do on their own. And yeah, I spread this not because it, like you said, there's not a lot of financial gain from sharing your work. Really, it's really, for me, I am a full-time teacher and department chair. Like, this is my
me too. Let's high five that. Let's just boom. Yeah, that's awesome.
Like, that's what I love to do. And I wrote the book really just to say, hey, this works so well for my kids, and I just want to share it with everybody because they gain so much from it.
Well, speaking of share it, the people we have here, like Candace says she's enjoying your book, so that must have been a quick pickup. And Phil's here. Welcome, Phil. Thanks for coming back. Ricardo from Panama's here.
Hola, Ricardo.
Nice. Caitlin says, hello, have to get your book. Love the spiderweb discussion format. Telling you, Caitlin, like, order it. I'd say right now, but I want you to stick around. So
You can do everything that you need to without it. I just think for anyone who's curious about more or what's behind it or, has a lot of questions, it just explains, I think, everything. I really wrote the book that I would want to read. I have a background in writing, not education, believe it or not. I studied fiction writing in grad school and never wanted to be a teacher. Here's a dirty secret of mine. My parents were teachers. My dad was a big education figure, and I was never going to go into their profession. I was going to be a journalist or a novelist. But I found my way into it and I loved it. So for me, it was combining my passion for education with writing, and I just really wanted to write the book that I wanted to read. So I tried to write it as engagingly as possible and practically as possible. So I think for those who are ready to kind of learn a little more, it's fun and an easy read. I really tried to make it that way.
100% agree. And I also found your session that way too, really approachable and really like you really broke things down. You it was a nice mix of inspiring as well as like practical. I mean, obviously I could leave that session and go do it, and it was just a 45-minute, session. Jennifer Knox here says she ordered the book after watching your Hive session. Loved your discussion ideas. She's going to try it with her high school and college students.
Awesome, Jennifer. Wow, both high school and college.
Roberto's here. Welcome, Roberto from Maine. I love it. I love when people are all over. Hamdi from Cairo. She teaches kindergarten, and she said she already ordered the book. Can't wait to read it. By the way,
there's a version in Arabic if she is an Arabic speaker.
Nice. She says, I love your session and those talking points and using them with her kindergarten classroom. That's awesome.
I'm always eager to hear from like the little people teachers because I am a high school teacher by trade. I've dabbled in middle school.
Dabbled in middle. I love it.
In middle.
Just tried it a little bit.
Just a little, taught a little 6, a little 8, a little bit in there. And now I have a 7th grader myself. But I always love when the kindergarten teachers come and tell me, and they always have to adapt it. I mean, of course, it's out there, and then take it and run with it the way it works for you. That's how I say it. But I always love to hear from the kindergarten and second, first grade teachers how they're using it because and observing those classrooms where they do because it's just so sweet and so powerful. I love it.
I think after my experience, I really truly believe it could be used with anybody. And I even think I want to change that sentence structure and say, I think it should be used because we were actually, you and I were in a bit of a discussion thread online the other day after your session. And I really mentioned to somebody that it's really hard to talk about the process of a discussion, right? And really teach kids sort of not only like the etiquette, but just sort of the flow and how to strengthen a conversation. But your spiderweb conversation gives us some data to look at. And it really helped my students. So I can't imagine how it wouldn't help, a first grader start to see the flow of a conversation, see their impact or lack thereof. And again, as long as you as the teacher do a good job of not making that evaluative and just sort of always working towards the best for the community, I think it would build a really strong class culture at any age.
Yeah, someone was asking on Twitter about the collaborative grade and really it just what I've observed and what many people who have used it have observed is those individual participation grades create a lot of competition and they drive a lot of thinking about what I'm going to say next, but not necessarily listening. And we've all found that when we had that model in our original classrooms and then switched to this collaborative model, it really improved the discussion and the interpersonal skills, whatever the age was that we experienced it in. And really the difference is we're no longer grading the individual performance. We have other ways to measure that. We have writing and we have individual conferences or oral presentations. We're grading the collaborative inquiry. We're grading how well we work together. We're giving feedback against that criteria to decide how, can we do better as a team? So I think that was kind of a revelation for me when I started with it. It was like, we expect kids, we expect adults, graduates to work in teams. We do this. We have difficult teams that we work with sometimes. We have difficult people we work with. Communication is sometimes a struggle. I just got out of work today. There were plenty of communications flying and feelings about them. And so how do we do that? We really don't train our kids to do that well through feedback and grading. We ask them to do it. We put them in groups and we make them work together, but we don't really often give them feedback on how well they work together. Some teachers do, and that's great, but I think generally we don't have a lot of mechanisms for that. And so this for me shifted the assessment experience as one that was individual because we have lots of assessments that are. And this was really about how well do we work together and how might we improve on that. And I think that's a lifelong skill we could all benefit from.
Yeah, Dean Gainey, fellow Hive speaker here, says he loves the collaboration focus, the interaction focus, so important in the world, and I couldn't agree more. But when I had that spiderweb sheet to sort of talk with my students about it, the conversation immediately. Well, I shouldn't say immediately. I would say it was maybe a hot minute. That was it, where kids wanted to see like what they did. You know, they were like, "Where's my part?" But after that minute, it then, so they started focusing on the tree, but quite quickly it went to the forest and say like, well, let's look at how that conversation looked in its entirety. And then the discussion became like, so are we doing this again? I would love to do this again. I want to see what those maps look. Are you saving that map? I mean, like they had such a vested interest in seeing the community grow and do better and improve. And I'm going to go one step further. Really saw their impact on the community.
Right. Right. Like if I interrupt a lot, oh, I'm interrupting. I never had to really be aware of that. I have to be aware of that. I'm an extrovert and an interrupter. I get excited about ideas. I can talk over people. So that's something that I've been more aware of through spiderweb discussion. If I, don't, sometimes people, and I think this came up on Twitter too, like someone had good questions about introverts and there's a whole chapter on it in the book. I have interviewed kids that were my students and have now grown up. There's a testimonial from one of my favorite students. I have video footage of him talking about his journey in spiderweb discussion, and his name is Ali. And Ali was this amazing revelation for me as a teacher about 10 years ago, because I always assumed that a lot of the shyer kids or more introverted kids didn't have much to say. And a lot of extroverts and a lot of loudmouths believe that. And it's erroneous. It's false. They have a lot to say. They often just don't have the space or sometimes the feeling of, confidence or courageousness to get in there. And so Ali was the first one to tell me on camera when I interviewed him for this, teachers don't call on me because I don't raise my hand and I just don't want to speak, but I have a lot to say. And that just flipped a switch for me. I realized that when we create really well-structured, balanced environments that feel safe, in which kids can share, you get a lot more out of them. And there was this one class I had for years. It was like the class that almost broke spiderweb, and I've written articles about it. There was one kid who was really dominating. He never let anyone get a word in edgewise. And finally, through the use of roles, I had to kind of troubleshoot how to get them to grow better. And a couple kids would come to me on the side and say, we don't want to participate because this kid's always monopolizing. And so we worked on it as a group. And finally, one day, he saw that this kid had a fabulous idea, but the only reason that we heard it was because this, loudmouth kid had a role that asked him to give his input. And so that it opened up this whole discussion. No one had seen this symbol in the book before, not even me, and we all just benefited from it. And so we unpacked that in the debrief. And that was the most valuable part. Look what happened when Jack, turned and said, hey, what do you think, Howard? And Howard was able to share everything, and we all benefited. So it became this really great learning moment for me about, introverts and extroverts are one thing. They both need to work on their individual strengths and challenges to really make the discussion rise.
Yeah, and again, when we put it on the community focus, I don't think it is as threatening, right? Because like just in your story there, you're showing to everyone that Jack's got to work on that interruption. but then you're showing, whoever the other person was who's
Howard.
Howard, like
They're all made up names.
they're all made up names. So right, like Howard needs to work on that confidence, needs to work on putting himself out there. That doesn't mean all of a sudden he has to have all the lines coming back to Howard, but like
Right.
you are part of the community. So somewhere in there,
Yes.
there needs to be a space for you, but when that space is created, like you also need to take it, right?
And I always give the metaphor of the spider web. We all have to pull our own individual strands for the spider web to stay beautiful and intact. And if it, for me, pulling my strand might be being more quiet, and I need to sort of learn that over the course of the year. And for you, it might be sharing one question at the beginning of discussion. Last year I worked with a student, and she was like, "I really want to do this, but I'm so nervous. I'm so nervous." She was a senior, and she was about to go off to college, and it was this huge growth for her that by the end of the year, she could ask one question at the beginning and say one thing in the middle of a discussion. And that was like tremendous growth, and everybody acknowledged it. So I think it's really exciting to be able to reach kids individually through a collaborative experience like that.
Yeah, Phil asked a question. It was sort of answered in the chat here, but I'd love it to come from you.
Yeah.
Phil asks, my copy is coming, but I am curious about what the recommended amount of time might be for the feedback session afterwards.
I think everything is really going to depend on your age group, your kids. I'm always just really careful to express and remind people whatever works for you is what works. So try different things and figure out what the sweet spot is. So for me in high school, that first discussion, I will usually set about half an hour on the clock. That is kind of a sweet spot for a first one. By the time we really get into it, let's say I'm reading 1984 with my students and we're going to have regular discussions every day. They'll easily go an hour, sometimes more if we have that time. We used to have 80-minute blocks now, and in digital format, we'll have shorter ones. But high school kids can easily go an hour plus if it's a good discussion. So in that, let's say I had 60 minutes allotted for a discussion, I would probably try to stop at 45 and allow 15 for the debrief. We might not need it, and we might be able to continue some of the content part of the discussion, but I always try to give 10 or 15 minutes, especially in the early months. By the end, by several months in, you don't probably need 15 minutes to unpack a discussion, but I like to kind of leave that time if possible. If you're asking how often I do it, because sometimes that's a frequently asked question, it completely depends on the unit that we're doing. In the spring with my sophomores, we were doing a research unit. We did not do it hardly at all in that unit because we were just it's not conducive to discussion. They were doing individual research, writing and research. And so that was our focus. When we did 1984, we had discussions almost every day. So I think it really depends on your goals for a particular unit. If the material and the text lends itself. I teach a film class to seniors. We watch a film, we have a discussion. That's our sort of usual pattern. And then they do writing in between. So I think it just depends on how you design the course. But for younger kids, the debrief might be shorter for sure.
For me, when I did it, when I first did it, the debrief took a little bit because they were so excited to like see it, and like it was new, so like there was a little extra time. So I would recommend building in a little more time at the beginning, in my experience.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Good.
And then I just love it. That's like I just love it. It really worked and worked well. We have another question here. I'm trying to find it here. I lost it here. All right, here it is. Candace says, "I wonder what Alexis would recommend for a class of 28. In her book, she says to use a fishbowl. Would she make 2 equal groups, or would she have a larger group talking?"
That's a great question, Candace. I think it's going to depend too whether you're virtual or in person. Right now I'm back at work, believe it or not. For those of us in the South, classes start next week for us. And I now have a situation where my desks are in rows and I can't move them. So it's going to change the nature of discussion and sort of, what it all looks like. Remind me of the question again.
She was talking about the fishbowl. She has a class of 28.
Yeah, okay. set it up, right. So you got 28 kids. Sorry, I got lost with the physical setup. So I think it's going to depend if you're in person and you have physical limitations, you're going to have to kind of troubleshoot that. So if I had a class of 28 and I could go outside, I might do a fishbowl situation where I have 14 kids on the inside, socially distant, 14 kids on the outside, socially distant, and you can do a one-to-one scenario where there's a listening partner, and that listening partner is taking notes. I've even seen teachers innovate and be able to give their partners formative feedback against a formative rubric, just how was your participation today, just for their own benefit. And then they switch. I've also seen models where, today half the group is working on something else. I had a small classroom physically once and a big group of seniors, 25 kids, and it was just too much. And so there were days when it was an IB class, so they were preparing for their exams. So I had half the kids with headphones on working on work and the other half discussing. And that worked for us. And then we'd switch the next day. So I'd kind of create two plans. Online, I think you could do something even better. So if you're virtual, I might decide to do this fall, where if I have a big group, half the kids are in like a parlay or discussion board chat, having their discussion through keyboarding and just text, and half the kids are in Zoom and we're discussing in real time synchronously. And then the next day we switch on the topic that comes the next day.
Would you make your spider web like the grid?
I know someone asked me that today. They're asking. I've done it a few times with Zoom, and it was easier for me in the spring because I knew my students well, and so I could do it quickly. But the benefit of Zoom is that you have the names, so you don't ever have that moment where you're like, oh God, what's that kid's name? Especially in the beginning of the year. So it actually, even though it's harder because they're not sitting in order of your circle on the pad, you can just kind of find, oh, that's Michael Matera. Okay, so I know, I just find it on there. So it's harder to outsource to kids now on Zoom. That's true. Kids like to do it. Sometimes by the end of, the middle of the year, I'll let the kids do the graph. They love that. They fight over it.
To also sort of echo some of your ideas, when the several times when I used it. So 2 years ago when I used it that first time, I did try it with everyone, and I had probably about 22 students, and that was a bit much. So when we tried it again that year, I did what you did, where we were kind of working on a project, and I kind of gave today half the kids, it was like project time, and half the kids was discussion, and then the next day, reversed. This past year, before the world went to COVID, what I did was I actually made it voluntary. I was like, we're going to try something new, and it's going to be discussion based. The question that we had earlier about when to do it in a unit, and you kind of spoke to how some units you don't do it at all, some units it's daily. For me, as sixth graders, teaching world history is rather cyclical. I mean, each unit, they have little to no, background knowledge. Then we learn that group, and then you reset, and then the new group, you don't know anything about that country or culture.
Right.
So for me, the conversation really can't happen at the beginning. It has to come 2/3 into. So I'm not doing it daily by any means, but those conversations come at that back half of a unit. And at that point, depending on what I think the kids know, I can do more. But I tried it voluntary based, and it was kind of neat to see the next time I asked, do people want to do it? I had almost 100% participation the next time. So
that's cool.
And it was really neat to see who are your brave souls, because to your original point about some of the quiet kids, it was a mix. It was like half quiet and half, boisterous kids, but they all volunteered to go in, and I did say it was going to be a discussion-based activity. So to your point, they do have a desire to share and be part of those discussions.
One thing I will say that I didn't say in the keynote is we use parlay discussions a lot. We were a pilot school for them. It's a program. It is for pay. It's, affordable per student, but it's still, a cost. But it's basically like a discussion board, but much more robust. And we use that a lot. And sometimes we use that during class. And so we would alternate. We would have a live spiderweb discussion in class where everybody's talking. And then sometimes everyone would come to class and we would have a discussion on parlay. And we would often survey the kids, what do you prefer? And we would see different strengths come out in different formats, and that's kind of neat too. We didn't do the graph in Parlay, but Parlay actually will do the graph for you. That's really neat. That's one of their features, kind of like equity maps. You can it'll automatically show the interactions for you in its data at the end. So you can still kind of look at patterns and debrief with kids about the discussion in person. So we would kind of have these digital discussions. And it was interesting to survey the kids. Some kids felt like I just process more slowly. I want to write what I'm thinking. When the discussion's happening, I can't get in there. It's moved on, but I still want to say something. And so, we find that a good mix is really healthy. It's not like this is the panacea to education or it's the only thing you should do. It's just one tool. I find it a particularly powerful one, but we combine it with lots of other tools because there's all kinds of kids and learners and just adapt as needed.
Yeah, I think that's important. I've done a lot of back channel discussions as well. You had talked about doing sort of the fishbowl activity, and I've done that where like the center is having like the live discussion, and then the outer circle is doing it all on a back channel, and that's been fun. I've used back channels in debates before, where you divide the class in half. I'll keep this short because it's not spiderweb discussions,
Oh,
but
interesting. I'm learning.
but like divide the class in half, and then they had a day to prep their sort of arguments, and then what happened was only two people, well, four, sorry, two from each side would go into sort of the center, and one would have their computer up, the other wouldn't, and then the whole team's back there in their own private team back channel, like sharing like ideas to like the two lawyers up front, if you will.
Very cool.
Just feeding them all sorts of ideas, and it was really neat to see how much support, kind of like you were saying, some of the quiet kids who didn't want to be sort of the guy making the argument, but holy cow, they were typing like, make sure you say this, make sure you say this, make sure they said this, and that was wrong.
And one thing that I love about spiderweb discussion, which is in the same vein, is that we're never trying to get all the kids to be the same kind of learner. We're not working on making everyone a clone. It's that everyone brings strengths to the discussion, which is why it's a team effort, not an individual one. And so, I've had kids, I started coding. People get overwhelmed. They're like, there's so many codes. I don't use all those codes every day, not even close. I just found that there were situations where I needed a code for something I didn't have. And so I'd make up a new code and I would just write it down so I didn't forget it. That's my page of codes. I have like 5 or 10 codes that I use pretty regularly. So one of them is T, for reference to the text, not just referring generally to it, but reading from the text to support a point. And I found pretty quickly, like, there are kids who may struggle at other things, but they're darn good at finding that in the text.
That's
and
awesome.
bringing it out in the right moment. And it's so great to be able to say to a kid who may be, really introverted, shy, or not speak up much, or not want to participate in debates, or, maybe isn't the strongest writer or whatever, and then say, geez, you're always right there with the quote when we need it. Like, excellent work. That's a real skill. And so I love that about it, that it allows sort of everyone's strengths to shine.
No, that's a really neat story to sort of break that down, that we're not trying to turn everybody into the extrovert. It's about honoring where they're at. And then like, I love the data part, because like I have never seen my students move on a soft skill kind of as fast as they could with that data. The analogy that jumps to my head is when, as a middle school teacher, when you start to tell kids they can't say or like, and they're kind of like, that's ridiculous. And then you start pointing out how often they do it, and you're like, see, oh, you just did it. Oh, now you're doing it again. Oh, you did it 4 times in that sentence. Now, the same thing with this conversation. Kids really don't know, at least a middle schooler doesn't understand how much they interrupt.
Right.
They're like, no way did I actually do it. And you're like, actually, look at how many times it went over to you.
And in high school and college, what we want in an English classroom is we always want you to support our ideas with evidence. So we don't really care what you think about the book. We want to know, where is the support? You might think, of course we care. You might think
I
a
get
lot
what
of
you're
these,
saying. Right. You're right.
but your opinion doesn't matter in an essay in college. It's what, your evidence shows. And so for us, it's really great to be able to say, okay, where's the text? Where's the text? Where's the text? You think, we
Your
hear all the
unsupported
time, well,
opinion.
I really don't think he's saying that. I really think he's saying this. And it's like, well, show us with a piece of text. So we get that, we're training that muscle, right, through the feedback mechanism, like you say. Yeah. And we're making them aware of the things that, even though we might say a lot, they don't see it until they get that sort of assessment piece.
All right, Candace has another question for us here. Alexis recommends the teacher not talk, but in her book, she gave an example where she gave the students a question to discuss in the middle of the spiderweb discussion. Can the teachers ask questions sometimes? Question mark.
Again, I'm not sure exactly what part of the book she's referring to, and what the context might be there. But if you watch the video, did you share some resources
I did.
somewhere?
So right off
Yeah,
to the side, there's all sorts of resources.
perfect. So off to the side, there are resources. One of those resources is the video, and you'll see that I interrupt in that video for a moment, and I say, "What did you say, go?" Because I saw that he made one of the most important points in the discussion, and
Is
I
that
thought,
is that in your core resource document?
yeah, it's the 10-minute video of the ninth grade class discussing Romeo and Juliet. And so it's like, what does it look like? And that's April. They've been doing that since September. They're very well versed in it. It's a very strong group of kids who've been doing Harkness since fifth grade. So, like, please don't base your classroom off of that. Can and will get there, but it just takes practice. But that is a perfect example of, I let it go and I let it go and I let it go. And I didn't interrupt in the conversation when it didn't really get to where I wanted it to. And finally, Gigi did say about the Friar's speech. And I was so happy because I was ready to kind of say, this was the whole point of the reading. And you didn't even get to it until the last 20, 30 minutes. But they did get there. But there was one moment where a boy said something really bright, and everybody missed it because he's quiet. And he said it, and they just were all excited about their ideas. And so I did say, what did you say, go? And he said it again. And then they were like, oh, and it opened up this discussion, and one girl says something else, and they connected to the beginning and the end of the play. So sometimes I think it is important to highlight something, or redirect or ask a question, but I try not to. And as you hear me say in the video, 99% of the time, if I bite my tongue long enough, the kids will get exactly where I wanted them to, or more, by themselves. But I have to really bite my tongue a lot of the time. And what I would say is, in the first discussion, try not to say anything at all, especially the first couple discussions. Really just let them figure it out on their own. And then they'll start to see you more as a partner, as you work towards this method. Later in the year, I'll sometimes join much earlier. I will stay away from the table. I'll let them, I mean, everything's now with COVID, who knows what this is going to look like. But the way I used to do it, kids would be in a circle. I'd be outside the circle at my desk, observing, listening. And then when I wanted to participate in the discussion, I would physically come to the table. And that kind of was a signal to them that I was ready to join the discussion in some capacity, either just as a debrief or as a partner in the discussion.
Nice. I think that what I liked about your session, you're kind of echoing here, is there isn't, I don't know, it's not so prescriptive. Like,
No.
be flexible, and like you had mentioned with the coding, it's not like learn this coding. You're not learning some judicial
No.
shorthand that needs to be in the law books. This is, you're not a stenographer. You're just doing a code that works for you. And
Yeah.
as far as like rolling it out, I fully agree with you. Anytime you're starting something new, trying the best to do it, to fidelity, so that people understand what it's supposed to be like. But as you do more of it, you can kind of loosen it up, kind of like learning a new recipe. You really try to do the recipe that first time, and
It's a
then
great analogy.
then afterwards you're like, well, I like a little more pepper.
And we all have different students and needs. I work in a very specific kind of school. I spent many years overseas. So my needs overseas were very different than here. I would work in cultures where speaking out or challenging other people is considered very rude. And so that was a whole other learning curve. I've worked in other cultures where oral tradition is the thing and written tradition is much less strong. And so the students were very, very good at the oral, but they had to learn how to not interrupt. They were really good conversers, but not good listeners. And so I think we are always adapting to our students' needs. Several people brought up on Twitter the idea of, not having cameras on and discussion online. Whatever I think works for you, your population, your students, your school, your district, your needs, I think is what you need to do. We know our kids and their needs best. And we're learning as we go in this new environment, of course, too. But we always, in my school and in my team and my department, we seek a lot of feedback. So we do anonymous feedback 4 times a year at least of all of our students through like SurveyMonkey kind of thing. And we ask very specific questions. What is the most helpful thing that we do this year for you? What is the least helpful thing? And we list all the things. But time and time again, spiderweb discussion is one of the top things. The kids just rate it as, not everyone loves it. Some kids don't like it, but they mostly, vast majorities every year rate it as one of the highest things that they learn from and enjoy in class.
That was my experience as well. And I have to say, you tactfully said that, that not everyone, it's not everybody's favorite, but I do want to sort of push us a little bit as educators. One, let's recognize there is no silver bullet, or else we would be doing, there's nothing that 100% of kids love.
No. 100% of kids love poetry, to 100% of kids love research.
Even like summer vacation. There are kids that are like, oh, I really like being at school and I love assignments and I love being around teachers. So we don't even have 100% agreement on summer vacation.
It's true.
So if we could just take that in, for a moment.
Yeah.
And then
I would be concerned if you surveyed your kids and 90% of them said spiderweb discussion is terrible, we hate it. That's feedback that you need to hear. Like, why do you hate it? What's happening here? Maybe the needs are not there. And maybe it's not right for your population if they're giving that sort of feedback to you, or not right at that time. But I think you're absolutely right. It's so important to say this is not a cure-all. It's just, for me, it's been this tool that has accomplished so many of my goals as an educator. And it has pushed kids beyond what I thought they could do in terms of social and emotional and interpersonal and communication skills. And all you need is a pencil and a piece of paper.
No, that's a genius piece. And I wanted to say, my students absolutely loved it. It came out high on our student surveys too. And honestly, I would argue some of the ones that didn't like it, I'm not trying to make it 100% here, but I'd argue some of the ones that said they didn't like it are the very ones that needed to be pushed the most, right? They're the same kids that might say, I don't like math class. That doesn't mean we're going to take them out of math class. It's because it's challenging for them.
And I can only speak to the populations I've worked in, which is pretty high achieving kids. I'll be really honest about that. I don't think it's a method that only works with high achieving kids at all, but
Correct.
That's just the schools that I've taught in. And for me, the kids who are new to it, who resent it initially, are often the ones who figured out how to game the system to their advantage, and this doesn't quite fit in that game. And it makes them have to work hard without a grade. And they're like, that doesn't fit into my game of my GPA. And so not all kids feel that way, but the ones who do, in my experience, are usually that kind of kid in my setting. And so for me, it's that, okay, I'm not trying to shut you up. You have great ideas, but lots of us have great ideas. What I'm trying to get you to see is, how can you be a leader? And does being a leader mean sharing your ideas every time? What if being a leader means asking the right question just once in a discussion that opens up the whole discussion for everybody? Can you shift your thinking about what your contribution actually can and should be to this class as a leader? And so sometimes I have to have a one-on-one with those kind of students to draw them in and say, I'm really looking for you to lead, but I'm looking for you to lead in a new way.
That's awesome. Roberto here, I don't know if he had to leave or not, but he said, thank you for sharing with us as a framework the 5 non-negotiables that pass the Monday test. I'm looking forward to using spiderweb discussions in my class.
Awesome, Roberto.
And Amanda Gray's here. She came late, but she's here. Better late than never. Thank you, Amanda, for making it. I gotta tell you, this, I hope people really do take your session and implement it. I get that this year is going to be a little tricky. It's even tricky for you. You're saying like you're going to have to think through how that works. I'll probably do a follow-up with you because I want to like hear how that goes, you know, so maybe sometime in January or something.
I've never started spiderweb discussion online. So I've done it online, but I've never started the year online. So that will happen next week, and that will be a new and exciting learning curve for me.
Yeah, so we're gonna have to like hear back from you on that. I hope that your school year and everybody else's school year goes well. I really did enjoy your session, and I hope people are gonna do the same thing I did when I went to your session, and that is like put it in play. And if you guys can't figure it out, I hope you keep it in your memory to use, you know, sometime down the road then.
Yeah, and if you want to explore a little more, the book, The Best Class You Never Taught, is just a really good deep dive into more ideas, more suggestions, more anecdotes from all kinds of teachers, science, kindergarten, everything in between.
So thank you for coming to Teacher's Table. Like I said, hope to have you back sometime. Everybody else, thank you guys for making this community as strong as it has been. I hope everybody's enjoying the Hive Summit. The next extra event, so there's Teacher's Table tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, then on Sunday as well. And then Sunday night, Sunday evening, we have our second game night happening at 10 p.m. that you guys could all join. I hope you guys have a good weekend. Hope to see you at the Teacher's Table, everybody. Thank you again, Alexis.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, take care.